And yes, a copy will be available afterwards for a nominal fee. Right? I take, Venmo, Skype, Zelle, will work out something. You can get a copy. I put together a folder of some goodies that you might find useful or not when it comes time to writing the California residential listing agreement. We're going to talk about some of the things that are in the folder. I'm going to talk about other programs that you need to have to know, and what maybe would be a good practice when you're actually going and getting somebody to sign a listing agreement, right? All of that just for today. And I like to sort of start by, and let me make sure the screen is being shared. All right, and there we go. All right. So I put this together. It's not everything we're going to talk about, but it'll give you, there's a few things that are kind of important. When it comes to getting paid, you have different options for agreements to use. I mean, let's face it, the reason so many people are interested in learning about the residential listing agreement is because you want to be paid a commission from selling a house. So there are other forms. The most common one is the exclusive authorization and right to sell. If you're a residential real estate agent, 99.99% of all listings are going to involve that form. Right now, the seller reserved, which is number 2, very rarely do you see that. But I went on a listing appointment and I'm talking to the owners and they say, oh, by the way, the church next door said if we ever wanted to sell our house, that talk to them, they may want to buy it. They were wondering if I could list their property, but if the church ended up buying it, they wouldn't have to pay me a commission. Now, they didn't know what it was called, but that's a seller reserved listing, used to be called an open listing. You don't see these very often. By the way, what I said to them is, why don't you go talk to the church now? And if they want to buy your house, God bless them, right? Go ahead. But I don't want to list it and order a sign. I mean, no, talk to them now. By the way, the church bought it. The open listing you virtually never see. It's something you only read about in legal journals and things like that. I've been in real estate a long time. Never knew, never saw an open listing. Essentially, it's a listing where the seller is not obligated to pay anybody a commission unless they bring an offer and the seller accepts it. They could give it to multiple agents, right? They could sell the house themselves. There's also 2 others that I've highlighted. Let's say you're writing an offer on a for sale by owner or expired listing or an off-market property. And if you're new to the game, off-market is a euphemism real estate agents use to describe properties that are not on the multiple listing service. And if I asked you what is the most important part of the multiple listing service, my answer is that's where it says you'll be paid a commission. So if the MLS says you're going to be paid a commission and you consummate the sale, you're probably going to be paid a commission. I'll talk about sometimes when you might not. But let's say the property is not in the MLS. It's a for sale by owner. It's an expired listing. It's just an off-market listing. You need to use another form. Don't use the listing agreement because you're not listing the property and marketing it. You would use the single party compensation agreement. Well, what if the buyer was going to pay me? That's called a buyer representation agreement, but there's also a commission agreement, which is a shorter, less involved version of a single party compensation agreement. We're going to talk about the residential listing. Now, when you go on a listing appointment, my recommendations is that you have at least these 3 apps on your phone. Number 1 is the Realtor's Property Resource. They have a mobile app. So my suggestion would be you go find the property in RPR, you run your CMA, you do all the stuff that you want to do, and then you save it by clicking on the little, star and saving it, and then you're going to be able to access that with your phone while you're there. It saved my assets sometimes because the owner is saying, well, the one over there, I think it's like ours and it just sold, didn't it? And I'm looking at my RPR, which is based upon the GPS, and it finds the property and it tells me about the property. Second thing you're going to want to take with you on your phone is called Zip Forms Mobile. And on regular Zip Forms, I would be filling out as much of the listing agreement as you possibly can. Your information, the broker's information, their information. I'm going to show you how to do that a little bit. And then the third that I use is called Chicago Title. It's called Chicago Agent One. It's a software, it's an app that allows me to calculate net sheets for the seller. It knows what's customary in which counties. I would go ahead and have that ready and saved so that all those things are in my phone. Now, the other things we're going to get to later. All right. So cool. Let me see if I can go back to finding it. Let's take a look at the residential listing agreement sample, right? Which you've been given a copy of. So agents, it starts with agency disclosure. The California Civil Code 2079, as I'm sure all of you know, right? You all know that, is the section of the California Civil Code that says that real estate agents have to disclose agency relationship, which is an information process, elect, which means decide if they're representing the buyer, the seller, or both, and then confirm that in the listing agreement. There have been court cases where the agent did not complete an agency disclosure form with the seller, sold the property, had a listing agreement, did not get paid, right? Tried to sue the seller to collect. The court said, show us your agency disclosure. And they said, oh, too bad, right? You don't get paid. So this is bundled in the form. And it says, I'm not going to go through this one, but it says either you represent the seller, there's people that represent the buyer, and then there's a dual agent where you represent the buyer and the seller. By the way, when I'm explaining an agent representing the buyer and seller, I point out that that means that if I or anyone at my brokerage, now EXP is a single sort of brokerage for the state of California, anyone at my brokerage sells your house, then we being, the royal we of EXP Realty, we are representing both the buyer and the seller in the transaction. And I say to sellers, don't you want me and the other agents at my company to try and sell your house, right? Right? And they're like, well, yeah, that's why we're doing it. Great, fine, let's go. This does not confirm anything. It doesn't obligate anything. It's a information thing only, just information. But one of the first things I look at when I'm reviewing agents' offers is this properly filled out? Because if it's not, we could have a problem. This is the Civil Code, which you can read if you have insomnia. The Civil Code section 2079 says that this has to be printed on the back of the agency disclosure. Fair housing and discrimination could be an issue when we talk about some of the specifics in the residential listing agreement. Basically, this says do not discriminate based upon race, color, creed, sex, national origin, ancestry, marital status, and other things. Don't discriminate. We're going to see how that comes up in writing the residential listing agreement. And that goes on for a couple of pages. Possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. This is a form many real estate agents have never read. Right? And if I had more free time this morning, I would have been writing some interesting quiz questions for y'all. One of my quiz questions would be, can a listing agent legally tell other agents how much the offer they have already received is and the terms of that offer? Can a listing agent legally tell other agents what the offers that they have received, how much, and their terms? Many agents say, oh, no, that's illegal, it's unethical. right? It's criminal. You'll be thrown out of the Department of Real Estate. None of that is true. Look at this paragraph here. Offers are not confidential. Buyer is advised that seller or listing agent may disclose the existence, terms, or conditions of buyer's offer unless all parties and their agent have signed a written confidentiality agreement. How many of you have ever had one of those things signed in a real estate transaction? Huh? Anyone? You know, it's a rarity. It, by the way, repeats that message in the listing agreement as well. Wire fraud, at some point, this is going to become important. You know, don't give your, usually it's buyers transferring the money into the wrong escrow, but this is a real thing. All right. Now we've come to the good stuff. Right now, what I recommend, let me just step back for a second. Let's say I was going to go on a listing appointment. What would I do first? And I was trying to get, how about this? I was trying to get fancy, but let me just, I'm in the city of Morgan Hill. Yeah, I know. How about this? Let me just go up here and I'll pick something I've done recently. All right. How about, oh, I don't know. I'll pick this one just for fun. I believe it's pending and we're, anyhow, here we are. This is a listing. Right? I mean, this is a property that is off market. That's what I was trying to say. And let's say I have a listing appointment on this property. So I would, first of all, pull it up in RPR. Remember, I talked about saving it. I would go up here and save it, right? Just so, I can find it on my phone really easily. And the reason I would start the process of writing the residential listing agreement from RPR is, first of all, I want to make sure that the names of the people in RPR are the same names of the people I'm going to go talk to. I've been surprised at how often there were more names here than they were I was meeting with. And then I'd have to say, well, who's this? And they'd say, oh yeah, well, that's my brother and he's on title too. It's important that everybody that is on title sign the residential listing agreement. So it would be good to know who they are, right? Just as a, just throwing that out. The other thing that I would do is I would scroll down to where I found this little, that wolf all by itself. One could say it's alone, howling, and that is the lone wolf logo for transactions and zip forms. I click on that. And what it's doing, and it's not perfect, but it's importing information into zip forms. Start a new zip forms transaction. It's a listing. Go to zip forms. And now it's giving me an error. I've had that before. They said they had fixed it, but I don't know. They've been having trouble with that. So anyhow, not sure why, but it knew that I was going to be talking about it. Here, let me just see. With sellers, do you have a previous recording? That's a question I'm not going. So what are the chat questions? I'll get back to the chats a little bit later. If it's really a burning thing about what I'm talking about, just speak. Notice that despite it gave me that big error message, it did successfully import the listing information. So now I can click on it. And by the way, you should create a template, that one for buyers and one for sellers. You should have a listing template. So I click on this. I have a few of them, right? I have a few templates. And I click on that. And what that's going to do is put my information and my broker's information into the form. Now, if I can import information from the tax records about the property and import my information, the broker's information about the form, that's a lot of the transaction. Now, if I go to parties, you can see there's me and the seller. I would like to add the seller's email address. I would like to do that. Because at some point we may be signing everything electronically, which requires their email. If the seller, if when I'm at RPR, it doesn't have a person's name, but it has an LLC or a trust, then I would be putting the name of the LLC or the trust up here, and then putting in the person who's going to be signing down there and their email address. Does everybody understand? All right. But we would like their email address because we can't send things for electronic signatures. And I would click on save. All right, the parties should be all good. Like if I click on mine, there's me, my license number, my email, cell phone, broker's information, all of that, all good, right? I don't have to type it every time. Now I need a listing agreement. So I'm going to click on this. My template, by the way, already has most of the documents that would be required to list a home. So here it is. We would go down, click, that's the seller. Keep going, look to make sure places to sign. Now notice it doesn't really have the name right, does it? Right, that's something that we would have to clean up. It's not perfect about that, right? And so it has a tendency for some reason to mess up the name on the RPR import, right? Plus you saw the 500 error message, whatever. But notice if I change it one place, it changes it everywhere. Everywhere, all looks good. Here we are, we're filling out the form. Question?
Oh, this is Kim Dace, and I have a question. Is this in lieu of Sky Slope? Is this?
Sky Slope doesn't work as well on your phone.
Oh, okay. So
Try
this
it.
is.
Try it.
Okay, got it.
So I made a video on the difference between Sky Slope and zip forms. And essentially you have to pick one for writing your forms. I have a great big screen. I mean, I have a big screen. I like Sky Slope, looks really beautiful on that screen. But Sky Slope does not have a mobile app that works very well. So, but zip forms does. So we have to upload things into Sky Slope because that's where EXP is going to read them. But I use zip forms to fill out the forms. Now, Sky Slope has certain forms that it's good for filling out, like the TDS and the SPQ and the fire hardening, defensible space. I'm going to do a class on those. They're easier if you fill those out through Breeze, which is a Sky Slope program, right? But then you've got some of your files in Sky Slope and some of the files in zip forms. You have a transaction coordinator, you know, they put them all together. But I use zip forms because of the zip forms mobile, right? I want to be able, when the goal of going to the listing appointment is to get them to sign the listing, right? That's the goal. If you were wondering why we're doing, this is why. Now, sometimes, I didn't cover this yet, but sometimes old school, like, and I've had sellers say to me, well, I don't use, you know, email, and I'm too old to learn. And what bothers me is I'm usually older than they are, you know, and I'm like, get over it. You know, this isn't that hard. But there are people that just don't. So you would print out these forms. Now you have two choices if you print out the forms and take them with you. Number one is you can print them out getting special paper, which you can get from stationery stores on Amazon, which is called NCR, white, yellow, white, yellow, white, yellow. And then you print each page twice. And then when people sign it, they get a copy, the yellow copy with an impression of their signature. Why would you do that? Because the Business and Professions Code says that you have to give a copy of all documents signed by a client at the time they signed it, right? And how else do you do that? Second is you can scan the documents and email it to them. If you're wondering how the best way to do that, one of the best scanning programs for a phone is this crazy little company called Microsoft. And they have a free app called Office, and their Microsoft Office for your phone, free, has a phenomenal scanner built into it, designed for scanning documents, converts them into a PDF. You can do multiple pages, and when you're done, you can save. I usually put them in Google Drive and share them. Right? We understand one way or the other, you're supposed to give them a copy. Right? So you can print them out. Sometimes I printed them out so that I can go through it with people and then send them the zip forms e-signature afterwards. I'm in Silicon Valley, which not everybody is. Most of the clients here don't want to see pieces of paper as much. They want the electronic signatures. They prefer it. That's what they want. They have a copy once we've agreed. And by the way, most sellers do not want to read the whole listing agreement. They don't, right? They want to know how much are you listing it for? How long is the listing? What is the commission? All right, great. Where do I sign? Right? But anyhow, we're assuming they're curious. So you would put in today's date. Does that date have to be the date the listing starts? The answer is no. It does not have to be, right? That's the date it's prepared. That date becomes a reference date on future documents. You need a beginning and an end date. Well, what if the seller says, well, the property's not going to be ready until the 26th, right? So why don't we start the listing there? My response is there's a lot of work to do before we put your home on the market. There's a difference between putting your home on the market and listing it. In order for us to represent you and to do what we need to do to get this ready, you need to hire us. So you're going to hire us today, but we're not going to be putting it on the market. This is a question you need to ask people. When do you plan on putting your home on the market? List it now, because then you would open up escrow, get a preliminary title report, maybe order inspections and reports, work on disclosures, maybe talk to painters, stagers, and others, right? Don't do that without a listing agreement. Right. So even if let's say we're going to start now, right? Now, if I'm going to that now, by the way, I can leave some of these things blank because if I take my phone and if I'm printing them out, we could handwrite them in, but if I'm taking my phone, I can easily add dates and stuff, right? But let's just say, and then there has to be a date that it ends. California Civil Code and the California Business and Professions Code both say, and the one that the B&P code is the one that we fear the most, that if a real estate agent takes an exclusive listing without a definite final termination date, it is a violation of the California real estate law for which the agent can be disciplined for doing. How about to be determined? That's not good enough. The code says a definite and final date. How about 30 days after loan approval? Not good enough. The code says a definite final date. You need to pick one. What should that be? Well, you should know how long does it take a house to sell in that neighborhood. So we're talking about at least 90 days. And I haven't figured out if this is really 90 days, but whatever, May, June, July, whatever. How about that? Right? June, July, August, why not? 90 days. So it's already imported information. In the old days, if it was a manufactured home or mobile home, we had a separate agreement. If it was probate, we had a separate agreement. Now, and the agreements were all 90% the same anyhow. But whatever, you would check a box. If you check either of those two boxes, it will automatically load those addendums. Automatically put it in. What is the price? Well, how about, now this is something that you might not know when you're at the listing appointment, right? But that's why I want everything on the phone filled out, because adding a price and adding a date is not very difficult to do on the phone. Adding a paragraph, not impossible, right? You can do speech to text, but whatever. Listing terms, there's a good chance if you're writing stuff in here, you're doing something wrong. Did you already hear that? Just because there's a blank doesn't mean you need to write something in. Seller will accept a carryback. So, okay, right? You can write that in if you want to. But you know, usually you don't write anything here, but you know, usually not. Here we go. Now we're getting to the good stuff. Compensation.
Michael,
Yes.
so for listing terms, if someone had some sort of a contingency, can we add that there?
Well, there's only one seller contingency.
Oh, I was referring to like, oh, I mean, like, what if a buyer had a contingency as
You
well?
wouldn't put it there.
Okay, so it's different
So,
there.
so let's say I wrote in listing terms, all cash, no contingencies. Okay.
Mhm.
So if a buyer makes an offer and they have an 80% loan and an appraisal contingency, I guess I don't want to be paid, do I? Even if the seller accepts it, do I want to be paid?
Yes.
Yeah, well, but we wrote in something else. So it's going to say later on any terms, we're right now, sellers will change their mind about what's acceptable once they put their home on the market, right? You don't need to write that in there. When the offer comes in, you present it to the seller and the seller says yes or no. All right. But if the seller says, write something, write it in. I don't care. I don't care. I'm just saying, most of the time, nothing's written in here. It's just saying. Seller agrees to pay broker compensation. If
You said the seller only has one contingency. What is that?
seller finding a replacement property. It's possible that the seller could have other contingencies. I'm saying if you go through all the forms and you're looking for a seller contingency, that's the only one you're going to find.
Thank you.
All right. So we could check a box and write in, let's say 5%. This is the total commission. Buyer side, seller side, total commission. Don't write in, well, I'm going to get, you know, I'm going to get 1.5 and I'm going to get 2. Don't write in anything other than the total commission. Don't write in 2.5, well, because I'm getting 2.5. No, the listing is for 5. You're splitting it with another agent, 2.5, 2.5. Does everybody get it? You write in the total commission.
Yes, thank you.
Right? And then you can, you could put in a dollar amount if you're a flat fee broker. And you could write in some other poetry here, like, I don't know, pay for my transaction coordinator, right? Something like that. Normally, we don't have anything else written in 3A other than the total commission amount. Now, one of the things that's interesting is how many ways could you get paid? It says seller agrees to pay broker as compensation for services irrespective of agency relationships. If, or if a purchase agreement is entered into, oh, by the way, here we put, if during the listing period or any extension, broker sells the property, you get paid. Cooperating broker sells the property, you get paid. Seller or any other person finds a buyer, you get paid. Or if buyer completes the transaction, the buyer can't complete the transaction because the seller has prevented them from doing so. You'll also notice down here in paragraph 3, if this isn't highlighting it the way I'd like, if without broker's consent, the property is withdrawn from sale, conveyed, leased, rented, otherwise transferred or made unmarketable. So it says that you get a commission if you sell the property, your broker sells the property, another broker sells the property, the owner sells the property, the owner decides not to sell the property, the owner makes the property unsellable and won't in something where you can't transfer the title. What that means, particularly paragraph or 3, right, where it says 3, is that the seller does not have a right to cancel this agreement just because they want to. If they sign a 90-day listing agreement, they do not have a legal right to just cancel it because they feel like it. right? It says that if it is withdrawn from sale, you see that? Withdrawn from sale. I'm not going to let you show it. Made unmarketable by a voluntary act of the seller. I've had people say, well, I just won't let you show the house to anybody. Great, send us our commission check. What is the amount you would sue for? 5%, the whole enchilada, right? Just saying. This is why I just want to make it clear. Now, normally we're not always fighting with the sellers if we can't sell their property, but you get the idea. Number 2 is what's called the broker safety clause, the broker protection clause. And what this says is if we give you a list of people with whom we are negotiating, and they were to buy the property within the next 60 days after the expiration of our listing agreement, we still get paid. Everybody get that? All right. 60 days. Usually we're not doing anything in B or C. Usually we're not. In D, this is about the MLS. You're supposed to put in, and most professional brokers will require that you say how much you're giving to the other agent. So if it was 5, it would be 2.5. Oops. If I'm doing 5, I might be doing 2.5. Now, can you see if I say 5% up there, but then when I put it into the MLS, I only said 1. That's how much I'm giving an agent who finds the buyer. Would that discourage anyone from showing the property, do you think? Could that discourage people, agents, from showing the property? Instead of giving them 2.5, I only gave them 1. The answer is yes, it could discourage them, which means you could meet a lawyer. Yeah, you could meet a lawyer because you said 5, you promised 2.5 for the other agent, you didn't do it. You got problems, right? So the way it's done correctly is you put in the total commission up there, you put in how much you're putting on the MLS to give to the buyer's agent. It could be a flat fee, right? But let's look at F. One of the other reasons for looking the property up on RPR is when was the last time it was listed? Might be useful to read that. How long ago was it? Oh, well, I canceled it 2 weeks ago. All right. So the question here is there a valid listing agreement still in effect? This is asking the seller, have you entered into any other listing agreement with a broker regarding this property? And if they say yes, we might want to know, well, it was 30 days ago that listing expired. Remember this safety clause? Remember this clause up here? The one that says if anybody that's on the list, they were to buy the property within so many days, somebody else gets paid, right? So we want to know whether or not they listed it with somebody else recently. Number 2, seller warrants that seller has no obligation to pay compensation to other brokers unless the property is transferred to any one of the individuals. Those would be the list of people given under the safety clause. What else? Items included and excluded. This is a good thing to talk about, but it doesn't really matter in the fact that it's the purchase contract that controls what is included and what is excluded, not the listing agreement, not the MLS. But why not? Are you going to the patio furniture? Are you, this, whatever. B is a very important section. Is there any major components that you do not own, like the solar panels, the alarm system, propane tanks, water softener? Some of these are leased or lien. Now, I'm going to talk about what it means because I've been having a lot more issues, let's just call them, with solar panels on homes. So we might talk about that. But if they're solar panels, you need to find out, do they own them? Do they lease them, or is there a loan against them? And that means a lien. And by the way, many escrow companies, if the seller says, I don't owe any money, I paid them off, they may not trust you. and want you to prove that you paid and got a release on any of the leased or liened items. Here's a discussion of the multiple listing service. What is it? The part that I want to call your attention to is which MLS are you in? Right, which one? Now I am a member of MLS listings, all right? But let's say I want to list a home in Fremont, right? I have a listing in Fremont, but anyhow, Fremont is Alameda County. MLS listings is Santa Clara, San Mateo, Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito County. It's not Alameda County. So it's not the primary MLS for that geographic area. It is not. Well, so what? All right, can't agents search? I can search Fremont from my MLS. So can MetroList, so can Berra, so can SF, so can CR MLS, so can San Diego MLS. So what's the issue? How many of you have a company generated website? Right? You got a website, and the website uses something called IDX, the Internet Data Exchange. Now, if you're a bridge MLS, which is Alameda and Contra Costa County, and you have a website, your website will only display listings that are in Bridge MLS. They will not display listings in MLS listings, San Francisco Association, Barris, or MetroList, or CR MLS, or any of the others. Only in that MLS. So is there a way I could get it in there? There's reciprocal and things like that, but you understand it could be an issue because all of the agents, KV core searches by agents that are in that, my listing's not there. Because I put it in MLS listings, I didn't put it in Bridge MLS. Does everybody understand that's the issue? It's going to be on Zillow. It's going to be on Redfin and Realtor.com. They're a member of all the MLSs. The only place it's not going to show up is real estate agent websites. If you didn't know that, I'm explaining it now. Does the seller care? They usually don't even read it, but whatever. I'm just saying. This is saying why you should have the MLS, clear cooperation, everybody. MetroList for a while was holding out, but I think I think everybody is. And then I've also put in some information in the folder about what is coming soon. And the rules are a little bit different depending upon where you are. And what I mean by that is CR MLS and MLS listings and Barris oftentimes have different rules for this. Let me see if I can find my folder again. And so what I did, back here, I put it here. Okay. So this is from MLS listings, which is the bulk of you. Your MLS is sometimes different. I definitely know that MetroList has different rules than MLS listings. But the question is, are you putting it on as a exclusive listing? There is a rule that says that you have 24 hours, I believe it is 24 hours, from the day you took a listing to put it on the MLS. Well, we're not ready to show it. We're still doing work. We're going to paint. So you can put it on as what's called an exclusive. Right? You just go into the MLS like you're adding a listing, but you pick exclusive and you just say to them, hey, I got a listing. Right? Don't get mad at me. Right? But you can't do anything really at this point. No for sale sign. Right? Not yet. You could have a members only listing, which is what we call a coming soon listing. And it's either show or do not show. And once you've done that, you can start doing some things. You can be advertising it as coming soon. Notice this box here. You could have a for sale sign with the rider, and the rider says coming soon. Better say coming soon. But you're not supposed to show it to anyone because you pick members only, do not show. Members only show is, again, you can advertise it like, with a sign and whatever, But it's not going to be on Zillow and Redfin and a lot of those others because it's a members only. And then there's a regular active listing. Now, in some MLSs, if you put it in as a coming soon, it starts the clock ticking for days on market, which you don't want. So you need to understand what's going on in your market. But why would we do it as coming soon? I'm not going to get into all of that, but anyhow. If it is not going to be put onto the MLS like right away, right, within one business day, if it's not going on the MLS within one business day, then you're going to need an SELM form, which is the seller's authorization to exclude the listing from the MLS. And notice you could simply say, we'll be ready by that date. This is not chiseled in stone. You could modify it depending upon circumstances, but they just want they want the seller to know that you're not putting it on the MLS. That's usually the only thing we do here because we're oftentimes not listing it within one business day. The D2, seller instructs broker not to market it to the public. This is, maybe the people are famous, right? They don't want people to know. But obviously, if you want to get the highest price possible, you would like to, you like Zillow to have heard of it, and Redfin and Realtor.com, and you'd like to be marketing it to the public. There's very limited times when clear cooperation, that's the one that says you have to put it into the MLS within one business day, does not apply. I doubt anybody that's hearing me right now is in an MLS where it does not apply. MLS data on the internet, if they don't know this, their address is going to go on the internet. They probably don't know that people could find it anyhow with software that's freely available. That most people want their property on the internet. They wouldn't want them to have it on Zillow and Redfin and every place else. Most people don't mind that Redfin and Zillow are doing their own automated, and you could opt out, but I'm not even sure that does any good. I don't know. How am I doing? Oh, seller's representation. Seller represents that otherwise specified in writing. Seller is unaware of any notice of default recorded against the property. This is another reason why I would take a look at RPR first. Now, the notice of default does not affect the listing of the property, but it may affect the sale of the property. So what I mean is that if there's a notice of default on your listing and the buyer is not a owner-occupied 1 to 4 unit residential buyer, owner-occupied is the key phrase there, then this is a type of an equity transaction. And California law requires that if an investor is buying a property in default, that there are special warranties, guarantees, and rights of rescission. And so the California Association of Realtors has written a form to purchase a property with a notice of default. So what you would need to know is when somebody's making an offer, you would want to ask them, and you could tell from the checkboxes usually, is this an owner-occupied purchase? And if it's no, this is an investor, you can't use the regular form. You got to use the special notice of default form. Any delinquent amounts under the loan, sometimes that comes back. Bankruptcy, insolvency. Bankruptcy, by the way, is going to derail your listing. Right? It might be that you'll get it back, but the bankruptcy court's going to take over. Right? You'll just take over, and you're not going to be able to sell without their permission. Any litigation, arbitration, government, and other pending for any of this, you'd be asking the seller, any of this going on? any current or proposed special assessments. Yeah, I got one now that's causing a lot of problems because the homeowner association said, well, we're going to have to replace the siding and we don't know how much it's going to cost. And we don't know when we're going to do it. But there'll definitely be a special assessment. Lenders are not happy about that, right? Does everybody understand paragraph 9, whether you made these a list of questions that you're going to ask anyhow, you get the point. These are things you need to know. What are we going to do? We're going to do our best to sell the property, right? And unless seller gives broker written instructions to the contrary, broker is authorized but not required to order reports and disclosures, advertise and market the property, and, basically try to sell it. We're going to present offers, buyer supplemental offers, buyer letters. These are oftentimes called love letters. Remember the fair housing 3-page form says you're not supposed to discriminate based upon race, color, creed, sex, national origin, marital status, ancestry. Remember that? So is it possible, can we see a downside of giving the sellers pictures of the different families making an offer and telling the seller to pick the one they like best? Can anybody see a potential downside to that? Right? Is that how the seller is supposed to pick buyers? Because of the children? Because of their ethnicity? Right? Does everybody see the problem? And what would happen is, and so our recommendation is that the seller does not get or read these letters. Don't check that box without talking to your broker. And the reason is let's say you were a buyer and you didn't get it. And it turns out that the price you offered was the same price that it closes for. But because you understand, you might be able to argue in a court that it was the pictures, that's how they picked. They picked based upon the other buyer's race, color, creed, sex, national origin, ancestry, marital status, ethnic background. Investigations and reports, this is important. The natural hazard disclosure is sort of hardwired in. Right? You can negotiate in the purchase agreement who pays for it. They're not very expensive. My recommendation is you're going to want these things. Now, sometimes the roof inspection is included in a property inspection, but if it's got a roof, you might want to get a roof inspection if it's not included. If you've got a pool inspection, and if it's got septic, a septic inspection. Now, is it true that the buyer would probably order these things and pay for them themselves afterwards? The answer is yeah. However, again, in Silicon Valley, at least 80% of the time, single-family homes are sold with the whole brace of inspections. Termite, property, HOA, everything. The reason we do that is we want to give the buyer the TDS, the SPQ, everything prior to making an offer, so that the buyer can make an offer without an inspection contingency. If the seller doesn't have any of this stuff, then the seller can't really expect a non-contingent offer, right? Because they don't have a termite, which means that the buyer is going to have an option of renegotiating the price in the middle of the transaction. Well, we put in the contract as is. That doesn't do any good. The contract already was as is, right? This is new information being disclosed to the buyer. They didn't know about the $20,000 of termite, the subterranean termites. They didn't realize the only reason the building is standing is the termites are holding hands. Now they know what you meant when you put on the flyer that at this house you'll be surrounded by abundant wildlife. Now they know.
Michael, I have a question. Sorry, Michelle.
All right.
How about solar reports? Because I was in a deal once where we were told the solar was leased and come to find out later it was purchased. Now, that makes me want to think there's a solar advisory form in CAR that you can add where the person has to actually go through and answer. But if you don't get those reports and you're taking the word that from your sellers that the solar's obviously leased, and then you come to find out it's purchased, that's different. That's going to affect you.
Right. So first of all, there is a form called it's a solar advisory and disclosure, where it asks the seller those kinds of questions. If the seller said to me, it's leased, I would say, great, I need a copy of the lease. The purchase agreement says that if there's solar property, one of the contingencies is the buyer's willingness and ability to take over the existing solar lease. And the buyer has to be given a copy of the lease. So a copy of the lease would be included in the documents, the disclosure documents. You have to have it. Now, if that's going to tell you if it's leased or not. The preliminary title report may also tell you, because usually solar leases are treated as a fixture, but recorded against the property. And it shows up as a lien. Even if it's a lease, it shows up as a lien. Right? So you want to see copies. There isn't a report for solar. You can have it tested to see if it works. But usually the argument is it paid for? And by the way, if the seller says I paid it off, great, you're going to need evidence of that, because title companies and lenders are nervous when they see solar panels. Right? They're nervous. And if you say it's paid for, wonderful, show us the invoice, we'll put that in the file. It's leased, great, wonderful, give us a copy of the lease. And you need to realize that if the buyer doesn't take over that lease, there's like oftentimes 8 to 10 grand buyout. Sometimes they say you can't ever get out. And if there's a loan, the biggest fear is what's called a PACE loan, but that would also show up on a prelim. There isn't a solar report. You just want copies of their documents for the purchase or lease or the loan.
But you advise, if you're doing a listing with solar, to get a solar advisory just to protect you on that end in case things do change.
And any agent making an offer on a property with solar panels would be malpractice if they didn't include the solar advisory.
Okay.
Right. I mean, and by the way, it's in the purchase agreement. When you're doing the purchase agreement and you get through with the grid and there's all the other addendum, that's one of them. You check up, you can add it.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool.
Michael, I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you only order a foundation inspection if the house inspector makes a recommendation for that to be done?
Yes, and usually, so we don't have foundation inspections as often as we used to because a lot of people won't do them, right? We used to have companies that only did foundations. Generally, they don't. What you're looking for is a person with a contractor's license. So the property inspector, do you understand? Anybody could be a property inspector, right? It's not a licensed thing. So the property inspector says, well, there's cracks in the foundation, vertical cracks, horizontal cracks. They may have an opinion. One is considered worse than the other, but the property inspector doesn't really know. So the property inspector is going to say there are cracks in the foundation. Who do you need to go look at that? A general contractor who says they do foundations. By the way, they all do foundations, because if you're going to build a house, you got to have a foundation. And then the general contractor will tell you whether or not those are serious cracks and whether or not you can just epoxy them over and brace them, or whether or not what needs to be done, and give you a bid. This is why if I'm representing a buyer and the seller has a property inspection, I don't necessarily recommend we order another one. I recommend that we go through, and anything that they flag as being a potential issue, we get a general contractor to give us a bid on it. Because now the property inspector won't tell you how much either. Contractor will.
Okay.
All right. Agency relationships. What else do we have here? Disclosure. We've already this is sort of a rehash of that. Here's an interesting thing. Do people have video, audio, recording devices, surveillance devices in their property? Now, I included in the little packet for you, the California Association of Realtors legal department points out that California has a law. It's in the penal code. This means crime, not civil code. And it says that if one person records the conversations of another person without their knowledge or consent, you could be fined $2,500 and spend up to 1 year in jail or both. It's a crime. Now, if you have a sign that says there's recording going on, then the penal code says that then it's not a crime because you've notified them you're doing it. So if you seller is advised to post a notice disclosing the existence of security devices. Remember, like nanny cams, hidden security cameras. This is what I tell buyers. And I'm telling you, you should assume when you're showing a house, they're listening to you. You should assume that. I would, in other words, while you're showing the house and you're chatting with your buyers, maybe you shouldn't say, "Oh, look at that. That's so ugly." Or these people must be colorblind. Look at what they did. They put those two things together. Oh, that listing agent, I talked to him yesterday. What a moron he is. I can't believe how little he knew about. You understand, while you're doing all that, it's quite possible that they're watching you, listening to you. Yeah. So I say, let's talk outside, right? I just make sure that whether there's a sign or not, I mean, it definitely, if there's a sign, I point to it, you know. But even if there's a sign or not, does that mean that they might still be recording us? Right? Just saying. Just saying. Photographs and internet, usually we don't check stuff. If the seller doesn't want pictures and they don't want it on the internet, they aren't that serious. I'm not going to get into that. You should have a lockbox on the property. If the seller doesn't want one, they would check the box. If it's tenant occupied, you need to use this lockbox key safe form so that the tenants have agreed for you to put a lockbox on tenant occupied property. It's always better if there's no tenant. You probably want a for sale sign. If not, you check the box. Attorney's fees, we're not going to get into that. If it's a trust, you check that box. If, remember we said, what is the seller contingency? Seller intends to include a contingency to purchase a replacement property. It's the only real seller contingency. Management approval means your broker could turn it down. Not sure why they would do that. I've had agents that had it turned down because they were at a different broker and the commission wasn't enough. The broker said there's a minimum and you didn't make it, so we're turning it down. Thankfully, EXP does not have rules like that. But you understand that's when the broker would say no, maybe. Mediation. Arbitration used to be in the contract. It's no longer there. The reality is that if we sued each other, the agency and the seller, which almost never happens, it would go to arbitration anyhow, just because of the nature of the dispute. But mediation, which is like marriage counseling, is how it would begin. This is the entire agreement. This means that this constitutes the entire contract. Complete and exclusive expression of the agreement may not be contradicted by evidence of a prior agreement or contemporaneous oral agreement. I hear agents, this is true for both the purchase agreement. By the way, the purchase agreement has exactly the same wording. So I get agents sending emails saying that you said it on the phone and oral agreements are just as binding as written one. Oh, really? Really? The lawyers would be surprised to hear that. You know, if it isn't in writing and an addendum to this, it isn't there. Ownership, title, and authority. You want to make sure that the people signing this are the people that own it and have the authority to convey the title. Right now, if it's a trust, the title company is going to want to see their papers. right? If it's depending upon if it's an LLC, they're going to want to see that the person has authority to sign on behalf of the LLC. Legally authorized signer. So if it's an entity seller, that would mean LLC trust. There's different kinds of trusts. If you click on this, notice it puts in different information. But if it's an entity seller, if it's so there's two different kinds of trusts. There's what's called the vested trust, which means somebody passed away. And that is a full-on trust, exempt from transfer disclosure statement and a bunch of laws. The most common trust we see is called a family trust or an inter vivos trust or a living trust, where people just put the property in the name of the trust. It's handled like any other transaction. There's nothing special other than where the seller is a trust and not a person. All right. But if it's a probate, they are going to want to know if it's a trust that's vested or probate, they're going to want to know that information, because the title company is going to need to figure out whether or not whoever's signing this has the right to sign it. Seller signs, agent signs on behalf of the broker. If you have two brokers with different companies are co-listing the property, there's another form. And then there's a seller advisory and the privacy, and we've hit the end of that form. Does security disclosure include exterior cameras? It includes the security disclosure. The law that says it's a crime to record people without their knowledge is not specific to inside a structure. Ring doorbells. While you're standing at the door to ring doorbell and you're saying to your client, boy, this is an ugly house, isn't it? You know, you should expect that they're watching you. Just saying. But the security thing is not specific to just inside. Usually you see people put up a big sign. And I put in, because I know you all wanted to see it, I put in some other fun things in this folder. This is an article from NAR about the issues with the surveillance, earning a commission. I put in some of the quick guides that, you know, on earning a commission, the different kinds of commissions and things like that, the safety clause, all of that. Any questions? Which zip forms mobile app do we need? There's only one. Under listing terms, do you write you'll be compensated for marketing pre-list work if the home doesn't sell? Okay. So the question is, under other terms, can I say that if the property doesn't sell, I want the seller to pay me for what I've spent? So can you write that in? The answer is yes. Can you enforce it? It would be easier if you had a dollar amount. If you said seller agrees to pay me $500 or something, rather than an unknown amount. If you want a contract is a promise that the law will enforce. So just getting the seller to say, yeah, because you wrote it in, without the seller really knowing how much that's going to obligate them for, may not be a promise the law will enforce. And if the seller doesn't pay you, you're going to have to take them to small claims court in order to collect. And by the way, small claims court and arbitrators also are not in the habit of giving real estate agents money when they didn't sell the house. I'm just telling you that, right? They're not necessarily going to be on your side. But can you write it in that I get 500, 2,000, whatever you want? Yeah, you can do that. But good luck collecting. There's actually, if it's a tier, there's actually two that come up. So there might be two that come up, Emily, for zip forms, because there's an iPhone and and Android, I don't know. If it's tiered pricing and it says the sales price exceeds a certain amount, the commission will be increased. Where should I put that? So the dual variable pricing, there really isn't a place in the contract for it, right? You could make that an addendum. That would typically be how we do it, or write it in where it says other terms. There's a section in the residential listing agreement, other terms, and you could write in the dual variable there. And then when you put it on the MLS, you're required to say that it is a dual variable commission. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, it's either could be I get paid a different amount if I sell it myself. So it's 5% if another agent sells it, but I've agreed to do it for 4 if I sell it myself. So I'm getting the 2.5 plus a 1.5 bump, right? So that has to be mentioned in a MLS listing so that other agents realize that you might, you might have that as an advantage. Or if it's tiered pricing, which is not that common, but you could do it, that would also be put, but now you have to explain it to people, right? Because you just check a box in the MLS. Any other questions?
Michael, if the seller is trying to sell a rental and plans to do a 1031, do you have to put it in the terms anywhere?
The seller finding a replacement property would be a good box to check.
No.
As you know, the seller has 45 days from close of escrow to identify the replacement property and 180 days to close. You would also put, it's not the listing agreement where that's so important, but you would put it in the MLS as a box to check that says that it's a 1031 exchange. And you would insist that an agent writing an offer includes the seller intent to exchange addendum. And you would put in your instructions to agents writing offers that you want the seller intent to exchange addendum. You don't want to leave home without it. We've had a case where the listing agent did not bother to put in a seller's intent to exchange addendum because there's no cost to the buyer, is there? Right? No cost to the buyer. All right, so why bother? You just didn't bother. So they're in contract with the buyer, and the buyer has found some things wrong with the property. Contingencies have been removed. The buyer asked the seller, will you please help with this? Can you do anything for us? And the seller said, no way. A deal is a deal. Not going to do anything. So now the buyer is signing off with the escrow company, and they give them these exchange documents. And the buyer says, what's this? And they said, well, these are documents we're asking you to sign so the seller can do their 1031 exchange. And the buyer looks at our agent and says, do I have to sign these documents? And the answer is no. Actually, no, you don't have to sign the documents because the addendum was not included in the package. Buyer wouldn't sign, seller lost the 1031 exchange. And by the way, that listing agent got sued, making everything warm and fuzzy from my point of view. Any other questions? All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. If there's no more, then if you guys have given up, I guess so have I.
Giving up. Thank you, though.
Next week, we're going to go through how to do a net sheet, right? How to use the app, how to know, right, what the net sheet is likely to be, because you may find yourself sitting at an appointment with the seller saying, well, how much am I going to net at this price? Or how much am I going to net at that price? That sort of a thing. Right. And this is the only way to do it effectively, in my view.
Lovely.
All right.
Thank
Cool.
you so much.
Thank you,
Very
Michael. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Michael.
Have a great day.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Right.